You're tuned in to Zoroverse.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Zoroverse. Today we're in Udvara in Gujarat, perhaps the Makkah for the Zoroastrians. We have a very special guest here today with us, Veera Rustomji, who's joining us on the show as an RTR alumni and a volunteer for the RTR 7, which is the Return to Roots program, as you may have been introduced with Fravash. Veera, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for randomly bombarding this on me. This impromptu setup, but yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, I hope we can share some pearls of wisdom with the team. Veera, could you introduce yourself and tell us how you learned about RTR, how long you've been involved, and why you chose to come back as a volunteer?
Sure. So I came to R2R first in March 2015. So I was in thesis year during my undergraduate studies at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. And I don't actually remember how I came to know of R2R. I know a family friend, their daughter had gone to R2R. And I wasn't actually too keen on going, primarily because my experience with Parsi events and culture events in Karachi have not been the best. And it's not because I didn't want to interact or socialize with Parsis. It's just that I felt that whenever I went to a all Parsi event in Karachi, it was never about the religion or the culture. It was just about having fun, which in itself is really important. So I don't remember exactly how I came to know of the program, but I remember distinctly that Aban Maka Kabraji, who is now the chairperson, because now R2R is a registered entity in North America, and she used to be the regional director of IUCN, the International Union of Conservation of Nature. And so my best friend, Anushe, she was working for Aban at that time. And so I'm pretty sure that's how Anushe was the one who told me about this program. And so I was pretty much happy to go to R2R because my best friend was going with me. And I just thought, so I viewed it as like, okay, we're going for a holiday to India. It's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, that's how I came to know of R2R in 2015.
And the most exciting part is that you're back here today, 8 years later, as a volunteer. So something went horribly right for you to be back. And Anusha is not here with us, like not joining us on the trip today, but you are. She's alive. Yeah. She's not here on the trip with us today. And I think like it's a testament to show that our Return to Roots, although that was their second or third year.
I think it was their second year. I'm not too sure, but I'm pretty sure it was their second year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It just shows that there was some kind of impact that was made. And so we're on day 4 of the Return to Roots 7 today, where we did a lot of interesting things, including a lot of travel. Veera, could you recount that for us? Could you recount the day really quick for our audience today to let them know what went down?
Sure. So today we've exited Bombay, and so we left our hotel really early today at Bombay, and we've driven into Gujarat, and we stopped at a very famous Parsi-owned restaurant on the highway called Ahura. We had a great Parsi breakfast, lots of traffic on the road. So the first site we went to today was the Nargol Agyari. And it was being renovated, so we saw the Atish in a different setting, but it was interesting nonetheless. Then we went to the coast of Nargol. We got back into the car. We drove to Sanjan, and we saw an archaeological site in Sanjan, which was excavated and verified to be a dakma. Then we drove to the Sanjan sanatorium, and then we walked to the monument of the so-called arrival of the Parsis in Sanjan. Yeah. And then we had about a 2-hour drive to Advada, and now we're here.
We have a short clip actually to show the audience today from this afternoon when we were on the coast of Nargol. So,
hey guys, my name is Veera Rustomji, and I'm an R2R alumni. and this is R2R 7. I'm here volunteering and helping out. So we're right now at the coast of Nargol, where the Baroli River is, and this is proven to be one of the first Parsi settlements that arrived from Iran, from the Straits of Hormuz to the coast of Gujarat, and it holds a lot of archaeological, scientific importance for us, but it also holds a lot of emotional value to us. So, yeah.
What's fantastic to hear is that you've been here and you've experienced this before, and this time you're back with a different set of eyes, a camera lens that you're very excited to take pictures with. And I just wanted to hear more about how your experience 8 years ago is different from your experience today. What do you notice? How do you approach the situations? Have there been any exciting or perhaps strange things that you've experienced? So please go ahead.
So this second time has been really different for me. The first time I came, everything was quite shocking. It was also one of the earlier cycles of R2R, so things weren't as amazingly planned in terms of these every itinerary. Arzan has really poured his heart and soul into making sure everyone has all the information. So or maybe I just wasn't paying attention to the itinerary that much when I came the first time. But nonetheless, I was amazed. I'm taking a lot of pictures this time, but I took thousands of more images when I came the first time, because every time I looked at something, I thought, I need to document this, because I will be looking at these pictures for the rest of my life, for my research and for personal reasons as well. So this time I know that I already have a massive archive of all the images that I took in 2015. So I'm being a little bit more selective about what I want documentation of. But it is very different this time. So I will say today was quite rushed, and maybe it's not the fairest thing to say, but I do think that we should have had a lot more time at Nargol and at Sanjan to really take in the site and walk about and explore and think about things. And I'll tell you why. Because when I came in 2015, usually on every cycle, R2R brings an archaeologist called Rukhsana Nanji. Rukhsana Nanji was part of the excavations that happened at Sanjan in the early 2000s. And she's also done a lot of research on ceramic potsherds, identifying their physical aspects and linking them to Zoroastrian evidences. So for anyone who is curious about this in archaeology, mostly when you look at a culture, you look at a culture through potsherds, coins, bricks, structural evidences that attest to that civilization living there. And so when I came in 2015, I had just started reading about her research through The Everlasting Flame, which is a book that came out side by side with the Everlasting exhibition on Zoroastrianism that was happening at SOAS at the Brunei Gallery. And so Rukhsana Nanji, Alan Williams, Philip Cranebrook, Dr. Sarah Stewart, Almut Hinz, they were all names that I had just started to get a grasp on around December 2014. And so by 3 months, and when I went for this trip, to see her and to talk about her research and to be on that site was amazing. It's one thing seeing things on text in a really fancy book, and it's another thing seeing it in real life, and then you really understand what the historian and the researcher is talking about and why they're so passionate about this work. And so what's interesting is that I feel so this R2R is quite a young group, by the way. Mostly everyone is in their mid-20s. When I came, it was not that. It was mostly late 20s and early 30s. And I was one of the youngest, Anusha and I were one of the youngest people. But it was interesting because Rukhsana, as a scientist, really, she gives you a very different perspective, and a very essential perspective, to look at evidences like Sanjan and Nargol in a way that, say, someone like a priest or someone like Khujaste Mistry, even though Khujaste Mistry is an academic and he will give you like a plethora of essential information, but like her way of looking at things is different, but yet very crucial. So I think it is really important to actually see things to understand what your own like opinion is of it. So for instance, the coast of Nargol, Arzan mentioned when we were there, there's no solid scientific evidence that Parsis arrived in 3 boats and landed on that creek so far. But it is interesting if you do some geological studies and you look at like the depth of the creek. You look at the fact that where the boats being anchored. If you look at Google Earth and Google satellite images, and you can trace how the creek has been shifting over the years, you can then sort of collect this data and look at like geomorphical reasons and see, could this area have been a significant port where Parsis would have been able to trade? Because one of the reasons why Rukhsana Nanji's research is really important is because she's continuously connecting evidence with Gujarat, with evidence in Iran. And so it looks at like, although we as Parsis grow up with this narrative that the advent of Islam and the advent of the Abbasid Empire in Iran took away everything that the Zoroastrians had, but it's also really important to know that pre-Umayyad era, during the Sasanian time, the Sasanians were the captains of maritime trade. And with Adeshar I, who set up the Sasanian Empire, he focused a lot on his eastern borders. And so we do know that the Zoroastrianism was the state religion of the Sasanian Empire. So we do know that the Sasanians were trading with ports from the North Indian Ocean, which is part of where we went today. And Kurush Dalal also told us some really interesting aspects about food and ingredients and spices that came from modern day Malaysia, Indonesia, and Gujarat, and possibly the Indus Delta as well. And were trading with the Persian Gulf. So the coast of Nargol is actually really important to think about in terms of Parsi economic, Zoroastrian economic trajectories that were happening bit by bit.
Right. That is so fascinating because, as you mentioned, like we've grown up in a culture where we were under threat and we immediately fled, and we were like in a rush to just find somewhere to settle as refugees. But it seems like there was a much longer or historical kind of affiliation, at least, that we have. Like we had some friends over there per se that we could go and like be in touch with or like visit, or in the sense that we weren't going randomly. There was some kind of groundedness that we had, knowing that this is a place. And I think that is quite revolutionary as an idea, because it kind of shifts the way we understand our history and our narrative.
And it should shift the idea because, of course, the Qissai Sanjan and the story of Zoroastrians fleeing persecution in Iran is really important. And there is a lot of truth to religious persecution and economic persecution that you can tell through a culture. Like one of the evidences is how Zoroastrians used to dress in Iran, and Khujaste showed us these pictures of how Zoroastrians could only dress they could only buy smaller portions of cloth. So we do know there was religious persecution, but it's a partial truth. Trade, economic prosperity has always been very important to Zoroastrians. And so that's something that's really it's something that should be part of the mainstream narrative. It's not always healthy to define a religion and a culture through hate and persecution. That's not, I just personally, I don't think that it should begin and end there. There has to be a wider way to look at things.
Fascinating. Absolutely. That adds a lot of nuance, and it gives us a sense of responsibility as well. Like it's not it's not that this one major catastrophe happened and it's like we're devastated because of that, but we had a very continual legacy. And I think one of the few things that even a Zoroastrian who doesn't know much about the religion itself might remember historically through the oral tradition is that this event happened. And yeah, it's just fascinating. Veera, I'm also curious about your own personal research. Is this an area that like is interesting to you? You mentioned that it was your thesis year in 2015, and so just could you brief us a little bit about that?
You're tuned in to Zoroverse.
I didn't actually want to do research on Zoroastrianism and the religion when I was in my thesis year, but I was really lucky. I had great teachers who were like, you have to do this. This is what you talk about all the time, and it's at the back of your head all the time. And coming to R in 2015, and once things are not just words on paper, it changes your motivations to do research, and it changes your motivation to make art. So I was writing a dissertation, and the title, I believe, was "To What Extent Have Oral Traditions and Storytelling Influenced Zoroastrian Visual Iconography?"
Could you explain that to us a little bit more? Like, what does that thesis mean?
So it had a lot to do with the fact that I was interested in understanding why do oral traditions and why is mythology a stronghold of visual information and of visual memory for Parsis and Zoroastrians as opposed to evidence and science and data. So I was looking at 3 specific examples. I was looking at the portrait of Zarathustra. I was looking at the predominance of the visual of fish in our culture. And thirdly, I was looking at the importance of the story of migration. Why is that the crux on which Parsis define who they are? We came from Iran, we fled Islam's persecution, and we came to Gujarat, and now we're Parsis. So I was looking at why that story is the definitive factor for so many Parsis, and how come we all have such similar visuals in our head, that there was a storm at sea, there was a ship, there were people who were safeguarding the Atish, there was rain, they landed cascading onto the sand. How is it that such a wide diaspora of people are drawing upon the same imaginative visuals, but we don't necessarily have a storybook that is illustrating or outlining that story bit by bit, and that has been widely circulated generation after generation. So it goes to show like the power of oral mythology, and usually oral mythology and storytelling becomes really vital to a person because of who the conveyor is. So it's usually coming from a grandmother, a mother, a person in the home that has like spiritual and familial significance to you. And so then I was comparing that with the Kesai Sanjan, which is it's what they call a quasi historical piece, and the Kesai Sanjan was penned by a priest called Baman Kekobad, who came from a priestly family. And because he wrote it in 1599, that's a significantly long time after these archaeological pieces and other sorts of data like the Rivayats attest to Zoroastrian settlements in Gujarat. So the fact is that the first piece of written evidence we have of the story of migration probably happened a couple of hundred of years after Zoroastrians started to come to Gujarat. So that means that for a long time, this tale was also oral, but also Kesai Sanjan is written like in hyperbolic language. It's romanticized. It's talking about it talks about the survival of the Atish. So it's romanticized. It's poetic. It's not a factual piece of historical information. So I was looking at that, and I was looking at just as Khajaste was talking about Pittawala's portrait of Zarathustra. It comes from a plaque, the Takte Bostan, in Iran. And it's actually the god of Mitra who is ordaining one of the kings, one of the Zoroastrian kings. And so it was seen by an archaeologist. He drew it, and then it just became into Zarathustra's portrait. But there is no scientific proof, just as there's no scientific proof to, visualize what Moses or Jesus looked like. So the same thing goes with Zarathustra. But why is it, like we're sitting in a room right now, why is it that this portrait is everywhere around us? And why is it then when we think of even praying to God, or when we think about Aura Mazda, for many of us, that visual of a bearded holy man comes to our head. So these are things that I was just really interested in thinking about. So I did some interviews here in India with Roxana Anandji. I got in touch with Khujaste, and he was sending me sources over email. And I did 7 or 8 interviews with women in Karachi, because I felt like the woman is actually the one, in my experiences, who is the transmitter of these oral traditions. So yeah, that is a part of my art practice, and it's still a part of my art practice, because I feel like a lot of people think that fine art is about making beautiful pictures, and sure, that is an aspect to it, but there's a lot of research and thinking and writing that goes behind the project, like the work. Yeah, so that's just a part of it. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It really feels like we can
we can go into it, but we don't have time for that today.
Yeah.
We need to eat dinner.
Just in case, like, I'm sure their audience members are curious, is there any way to be in touch with your art practice? Anything that you're working on, a project or a name that we can refer to?
I don't have a website right now, but I did. But I do a lot of research that you can see online. Like if you just Google, you will be able to see some images.
Do you sell any fine art? Do you have any?
After I went for my master's to London, I was looking a lot at costume and role play and film. So now my work is very installation and film based. So I don't make money out of that, and I have to do like full-time jobs. Like I teach at a university. So that's how I make money. But I do paint, and I do make light boxes, objects that generate small forms of income. But it's a tricky thing. You can ask any artist that you don't want to, it becomes a very difficult career if you are solely dependent on commissions and selling. Because as an artist, as any person who has a very deep relationship and passionate relationship with your career, you want to do what you love. So sometimes money is not part of that equation, and money comes later. I'm hoping. I could be wrong.
Fascinating. I think we have a few resources to follow your work and see where it goes.
You're tuned in to Zoroverse.
So this is our final segment of the show, in which we have 72 questions. Veera, do you have a number between 1 and 72 for your first question?
Sure, 70.
This is a wonderful question.
Oh God.
Have you seen God?
Like in the landscape on Earth, like I because of the work that I do with archaeology, I'm always in the field, and when you see remnants of civilizations and you see nothing around you, you may not think of God, but you think, wow, like the universe, like I'm just a small speck on planet Earth. So in that way, yeah, sure. We see the universe all the time. Yeah,
it's all around us. I think like some research that I was doing recently was on like patterns in nature and the kind of like fabric of the universe that is like foundational to Earth and a lot of other planets. And I think that is a close reminiscent of, or like an indication of, some kind of knowledge or some kind of intellect that is moving forward in this manner. Cool. That's a very interesting one. Maybe another question?
Okay, let's do 50.
What do you think is one of the most prevalent internal conflicts that the Zoroastrian community needs to address immediately? So
I think there are quite a few internal conflicts that the Zoroastrian community needs to address. Of course, I think as a Zoroastrian woman, every and any Zoroastrian woman will say that you always feel like a second-class citizen, because this is religion is a patriarchal institution. And I think that in itself leads to us not looking at religion through a feminist perspective. And when I mean a feminist perspective, I don't mean looking at religion and looking at the woman. I mean looking at religion and looking at how is it going to benefit everyone regardless of their gender. So I think that's a really important issue that we need to think about. And even so right now we have a lot of Iranian Zoroastrians on this trip who are culturally very different from Parsis. Some of the pronunciation of their prayers are so different. But I feel like maybe this is the generation that can make that gap and make that change, because I feel like there is a lot of internal difference between, I think Parsis are generally a lot more orthodox, and I think Iranian Zoroastrians are significantly open-minded in terms of how they look at religion, how they look at geography, and how they look at things. So I do think Parsis need to realize that we're struggling numerically, and we really need to understand how to be more inclusive in terms of community, in terms of feminism, in terms of understanding how can we really be successful and support each other. So there's so many issues. I can't, but this is just a brief way I could address the question. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think these are two crucial concerns that you brought up, and it should be on every Zoroastrian's mind. And I think, like, as you mentioned, the patriarchal nature of Zoroastrianism, religion in general.
It's not just Zoroastrianism. Like all the scripture, like we've been speaking to so many priests who have been very open with us, and they're saying, well, look, that's just what it's written in the Bandidad, and these are the laws, and it is a patrilineal. So we understand that that's what's written in black and white, but how are we going to survive 100 years from now?
Yeah, and I think it is our duty as a generation to make this change. So everyone watching, kind of like, I'm so excited to hear about comments and solutions that people might have to this issue. And if you would like to share any or like anything that you have in short.
I don't think there's a concrete way. I just think we need to think about things in a more, like, we need to think about how to support each other. Yeah.
I was speaking recently to Fraversh in one of our other episodes, and I think community building and understanding community as a unit that works together to support each and every node of it is vital. And I think we're doing a disservice to not only our community, but to ourselves in some longitudinal way by not taking care of the other community members. And I think it's a pivotal principle of Zoroastrianism to be able to show concern for the community. Thank you for that.
Which one is this?
Yeah, let's wrap it up with a last question. So anything that you'd like, just a quick one, and we'll keep it like a short answer.
Okay, let's do 32.
32, wonderful. How do you engage with the sacred texts of Zoroastrianism in your spiritual journey? Are there any specific texts that you focus on or like tend towards? And are they the only texts? Perhaps would be an interesting.
I usually will use a prayer book just because I find that more helpful when I'm praying in the Gyari. But also in terms of sacred texts, it's just not limited to our the prayers that we do when we're venerating or when we're worshipping. There are a lot of sacred texts historically that are written in Pahlavi, primarily available in Pahlavi, but there's more to sacred texts than just praying. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Veera. It was awesome speaking with you, and thank you so much for sharing these insights. They're really valuable, and I hope to have you back on the podcast at some later date to follow up on your research and to 130. Okay, kudos to that. Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's a pleasure. Stay tuned for our next episode. Cheers.